and welcome to this Unicourse video. My name is Ashley, and the topic of today's session is feedback as a development tool. Now, the aim of this session today is to talk through the value of feedback in performance management and the development of the team. Now, this session is one in a series of sessions on performance management. So, we've done three before this. If you would like any further information in relation to the introduction of performance management, the tools and techniques surrounding performance management, or the the fact that you have to analyze the needs for development, then please look back on our playlists and our YouTube channel for more information there. Now, per- performance management closely links with development, and we've discussed that in the previous sessions. But providing feedback to team members is a skill, and it's not always easy. Helpful feedback is directed towards the future, and the purpose is to not dwell on the past. It's about to plan for the future, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So, before we get totally started, I just want to make a few definitions for you. So, formative feedback is provided throughout a term of assessment. And when we say a term of assessment, any feedback is usually um, based around set criteria, um, around um, around the individual, and you might want to give formative feedback throughout. Might be informal formative feedback throughout the year, and then maybe the summative feedback will be the final feedback that's cross reference with base criteria, maybe like in an appraisal, for example. So, and it might be the summative feedback might be at the end of a development period, and like coaching or mentoring, or on a specific training activity, for example. And John Hattie, who is, he's a professional, a leading professional in the fields of leadership and management. He believes that feedback have more impact on learning quality than any other single factor. And there's various research out there um, to back up that point, and to back up that using feedback as a development tool can be really significant in performance management. And when done well, it can in, in encourage and motivate your team to want to improve and develop further. So why do we give feedback? Now, there's two focuses here. You can think about job performance, and that's about competency and how competent they are to fulfill their specific role that they're doing in their job. And then you can think about work related behavior, and obviously, focusing on work-based behavior can be a lot more difficult than focusing on competency, because competency can be matched and based towards, say, a job description, for example, which can be linked to a performance review. But work-related behavior and approach and work bad behavior basically can be quite difficult, especially to leaders and managers that are quite new to delivering feedback. So what we're going to talk about is the different types of feedback and feedback models, and how they help leaders and managers to enhance their feedback skills. There's a range of different frameworks which can help um, a leader or a manager to talk through some of the different aspects. So we'll touch on that in a minute. But let's look at different types of feedback. So, we have positive feedback, and this is good, to motivate people, to give them recognition when they have done well. And then negative feedback, a lot of people again don't like to provide negative feedback, but it is necessary, especially, when things aren't being done correctly, when maybe the organization's brand is at stake, when, somebody is causing customer complaints consistently, maybe when someone's in a personal improvement plan or a disciplinary, and that negative feedback can always be if thought through, and you consider some of the models that we're going to talk about in a minute. That negative feedback, if constructed well, will really help a person to improve their development. Specific and descriptive feedback is, it's given and usually matched against set criteria, and it's really really useful to be as specific as you possibly can, and be as descriptive as you possibly can. And sometimes it might take time to be able to gather some evidence to be able to deliver that feedback, maybe with specific data relating to the feedback that you are delivering. So specific and descriptive, it can be really helpful if um, if delivered well, really. And then collaborative and coaching feedback, it is a really, really great method for bringing the onus back onto the individual that you're delivering that feedback to, asking open questions and allowing them to be able to consider their actions and how they felt about it and how they would like to move forward. It's a really good way to collaborate with your team. And then the supportive feedback is, a great interpersonal skill for leaders, managers. It's about being able to have empathy for your team, being able to listen and actively listen at that, and being able to support your team to develop themselves. And it can be the case that sometimes you are providing supportive feedback, but you might need to refer them on to counselling or to HR or to the doctor, for example, if you feel like that feedback has come to an end or you don't have the necessary experience to deliver that. So that's important, and that's quite relative in relation to mental health. Leaders and managers can sometimes feel like they're the only people that the employee is actually talking to about a specific issue or problem. And they might feel that, directing them and pointing them and supporting them to be able to talk to the family, friends, doctor, to be able to, move forwards and maybe get a diagnosis, or, maybe just to be able to move forward and get additional help from someone who's a little bit more got the expertise to handle it. That's a great skill to have. But, the purpose is not to dwell on the past, as I mentioned before. It's about to plan for the future. And it's also um, important to think through, and think that though feedback begins with considering past and current behaviours and job performance, for example, it certainly doesn't end there. Valuable feedback uses past actions as a springboard to help the feedback recipient develop effective plans for future actions. And feedback can be difficult, but you might be able to utilize and use these models to be able to plan the feedback so you can confidently approach them feedback sessions um, more prepared. Okay, so example questions when giving the feedback. I provided a couple here, and it is a skill to ask open and close questions at the right time in order to be able to get the most out of the person that you're delivering the feedback to. But putting the onus on them by asking them, how well did you think that meeting went, or that sale, how well did that sales call go? How did you feel that the customer felt with that you dealt with that call? If you could do it again, what might you do differently, and why? And that's quite important, asking them why. Why would they do that differently? Because reflective practice um, for working professionals or for anyone really is really, really, really good in developing resilience. Um, and the way that the world's working at the moment, people need to be resilient. People need to be able to reflect on themselves, to be able to then develop grit, and be able to move forward in a positive way. So what learning do you take away from that activity? You might want to ask them, what did you notice about the way you performed? So giving them that onus to reflect upon what they've done. And you might want to ask them if you could make a suggestion, and asking them that question and not just giving them a suggestion develops understanding in a relationship, I think. And what do you know that you didn't know before? And it can be quite an eye opener to reflect on a situation, because some people just move on from it if they didn't like that situation, and reflecting on it, you know, really does open the eyes for how they can work through it. What have you learned about yourself from that? And what would you do next time that you didn't do this time? Or how could you improve and move forward? Or how would you deal with the situation if it was the same again? So asking them questions and putting the onus back on them is, it's really important. So let's move on to models. So Boca um, is a great model, and it's great to use when approaching a difficult situation or an uncomfortable conversation. Um, so where this is the case, it can be used. So firstly, the B stands for behaviour. Point out specifics here about the behaviour and how you felt. So you might say something like, when you didn't prepare the document I asked you for in the meeting, it made us look unprofessional. And then outcome is what you would like to see happening. So if the document was ready as we agreed on the meeting, then the meeting would have been a success. Then point out the consequences clearly and think about how they can be clearly defined of what will happen if the behavior continues. What can be them consequences. So if you don't complete the tasks set, the team will not reach their annual goals, and you'll not get your bonus, and team morale will go down, for example. Action focuses on what you want to happen to move forward. It's good to get the person involved here. Ask them what to ask. Sorry, ask them what they might have been struggling with, for example. And that, they might say, um, I didn't prepare the document because I was overloaded with other work, or I didn't really know how to use um, that pie chart software, for example. And then, following on from that action, you might be able to work through it and focus on a way forwards. And, you're putting the onus back on them again. Okay. Th- this model can be quite difficult to approach, especially if you're new to leadership and management and you're new to feedback. So, what I'd say is practice the model. Maybe write a little bit of a paragraph on what the behaviour is, or bullet points, what the outcome and what that result was, and what could be the consequences, and give yourself some bullet points and actions to move forward. And if you can practice as well, um, but yeah, definitely plan. If you're all new to feedback sessions, try and plan for them, and then you can be a little bit prepared for anything that might come your way. Let's talk about the STAR model. Now, I really like this model because it really does help you focus and clarify your thinking when approaching the feedback on like a situation or a specific event or a problem or an issue. So you're focusing on the situation or the task. Okay, so that's the ST there. So think about what the person was doing, or what should have been done, or what the actual issue was. Um, and you can use this for both positive and negative, praise or constructive feedback. So it's great. It's really quite good. So then you're focusing on the action again. So what they did or what specifically happened. And sometimes it's good to be able to get to the root cause of the actual problem and what happened. And that will allow you then to analyze the results or the outcome. So I'll give you some examples here. So you were on reception last week when an urgent call came in for me, but I wasn't at my desk. So that was the situational. You took a detailed message, then came and found me to deliver it to me in person. So that's the action. I was able to return the call promptly with all the relevant information I needed to hand, which was extremely helpful in heading off and avoiding a potential crisis. So well done. So that's a praise, you can use it as praise. You can also use it as constructive feedback. So you were importing a claims form into the system last Friday. You mistakenly added claims data from one customer's file into another's file. We sent the claims letter out to the wrong customer and didn't send one to the customer that was making the claim. So obviously you're really pointing out, and then you can plan for the future and consider what you can do to forward things to avoid the situation happening again. So if it is praise, you can sort of finish there, but the this is where the AR comes in, the STARA. So you're looking at an alternative actions of what they can do differently. Take more care when identifying a customer on the system and ensure all details on screen match those on the claims form. An alternative result could be that claims letters should only go out to the correct customers. So I like this model, as I say, because once you learn it, you can use it positive and negatively, and you can use it in different situations, and you can use it for behavior, and you can use it for competency-based work feedback sessions as well. So a really good one to learn, I think. So COBS or Corbs feedback model, it's quite common. A lot of people know about it, and before we talk about the main principles, let's just focus on what it actually stands for. Okay, and I've pointed out the corpse section here. So a clear statement is about providing clear and concise information, and this could be evidence or data that you've gathered before. So this is about preparation. Owned means your own thoughts on the topics or the problem or the situation. And you might say things like, I found or I felt, but not words like you are, because that can make people just really unsettled. Um, and sometimes angry as well, which you obviously don't want in a feedback session. You want to monitor and regulate the moods. Regular is about giving the feedback as quickly to the situation as possible. It's not good to delay. Um, it's just not good to delay giving feedback because if you do, people might just try and avoid and get over the situation or the problem. And then if you come to them 6 weeks later saying an annual appraisal, they might say, well, I've this problem's been going on. It's been getting consistently worse. You could have helped me with this as and when, you know. Balanced focuses on providing both positive and negative feedback because overloading um, with negative feedback, it's not good for anyone really. Be specific, but consider your words and apply them to observable behaviour as well. Behaviours that can be changed, or actions that can be improved moving forward. So another good model to use, but breaking down how you're going to deliver that feedback and planning for that's essential. So there's two different types of CDR model. I'm going to talk you firstly about Anna Wildman's, which was the first one that was created, and it's a really good engagement feedback technique. Um, the difference really between this one and the one I'm going to show you in a minute is this model's diagnostic step makes it stand out as a method for inviting discussion and input, but that you know and having that input from their employees as well, or the person, receiving that feedback, following by the action step. So asking them to make suggestions for how they can improve. And it's a good model for um, the feedback in the process of improvement. So if you were to do, say, like a personal improvement plan, for example, or following on from a disciplinary, or for someone that's just not performing to standards, so when you're doing the one-to-one reviews or appraisals, and the context is about explaining to them the importance of what's actually happening and giving them specific examples, and you might need to gather evidence on that, and then diagnosing the input. So telling them what the impact is and and how it went well or how it went badly, or that impact on not just themselves, maybe the team, and the actions about asking them to improve. And really important that you actually include time the objectives here, and then reviewing um, and monitoring how that improvement process is going, basically. The second section, as you can see, has got um, different meaning, but it does sort of still carry the same sort of process. So although the first one is context, the first one is clarify, it's still about clarifying um, and making clear the information. So we need all agents to handle an average of 10 calls. And the first one is about examples, but this one's about explaining. So, and it is about your view as well. So, given currently in a place you only are handling 7 calls an hour on average. So it's an example as well as an explanation. And then discuss the reasons for the difference between the two. So why do you think your call rate is lower than the others? And that's the diagnosis section on the first section. So it is, sort of along the same track. And then agreeing an appropriate action. So, okay, so you're finding the computer system difficult to navigate. Let's arrange some extra training and practice for you to become more comfortable. And then the reviewing section is about, monitoring. So I see your call rate has gone up to 9 calls per hour. How are you finding using the system? And this is obviously like more of a follow up feedback session to support them to move on to make sure them actions are getting met as well. The aid model is similar to the STARS model. It helps to identify a particular action or event. It's and its impact on the team or the organization and what you want them to do to rectify the problem or to avoid it, happening again in the future. It doesn't leave much scope for employee interaction or input. So it's probably most helpful for delivering a clear, purposeful message. So if you need to be direct, making sure that action doesn't happen again. It might be in a disciplinary, in a personal improvement plan. It might be that it's, an issue that if it was to happen again, it could really, really impact the organization's reputation. So sorry, an example is you didn't include a purchase order number on the sales paperwork you sent to the accounts. The invoice went out without the purchase number, which has delayed payment, and accounts have to reissue a new invoice. So please double check your paperwork in the future and make sure to ask the client if there is a purchase order number which needs to be included on the invoices. So it's about action, it's about impact, and it's about doing. Okay. So a really good model to use if you need to be direct in the way that you're providing that feedback. So Queen's feedback technique, quilled, sorry, it can be queened or it could be quilled. Um, I like the quilled more. And it starts by opening up the conversation by connecting with the recipient. So I really, really like this because it's about making the recipient feel or the person delivering the feedback or receiving the feedback feel more comfortable in the space that they're in. And if you are more comfortable, you're more likely to be more open. You're more likely to think a little bit more outside the box, and you're more likely to work together collaboratively. So, it is about connecting and building that relationship, and the relationship on the topic as well. So, setting the grounding, and you'll be providing feedback on maybe sort of a general statement first before you move in. So in this model, it's about setting the scene and getting them into the right frame of mind to think about the situation and the actions that you will be delivering feedback on. So looking at connecting, looking at observing the situation, looking at the impact that situation or that person has made on that situation, and then following on with the next steps. But also considering listening to what they think and putting some onus on them in their reflective practice and asking them to maybe establish their solution and how they feel like they can move forward with it to then be able to provide a definite agreement for what's going to happen, and maybe making sure that that agreement is set in stone with an objective that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. That is smart. And the final, model that I'd like to talk about is the feedback sandwich. Um, it is quite a basic one. It's one that most people know. And often, a disadvantage of this is a lot of people do know what the feedback technique and model is about. It's about making sure that, you're starting good, you're giving the bad bit in the middle and you're ending good so people walk away feeling happy sort of thing. But, you can't always end on a good thing. Although, as mentioned earlier on, the purpose of feedback is to not really dwell on the past. So that the constructive feedback could be based on the past, and then the positive feedback could be forward thinking. Um, so if you are directing that thinking to the future, it can only be good really. And remembering that management isn't about getting things done. Isn't about getting things done through consistently giving feedback and giving bad feedback. It's about providing praise to motivate people. Managing management and leadership is about getting things done through, effectively managing people and motivating people and encouraging people to be the best that they possibly can be. Remembering as well that, the biggest asset in an organization is the people and the employees. So, making sure that you value how you work with them. Now, I'll give you an example here of the using the feedback sandwich. And it's sometimes used, there's a couple of different names for it, but this is a good example. I thought you handled that presentation well. You delivered the information succinctly and clearly, and your visuals were relevant and informative. The one thing I would have done differently is to slow down to ensure that everybody understood everything. I think there were a few places where some people were a bit lost and would have benefited from asking more questions. Overall, though, good job. You obviously put a lot of effort and hard work in. So end and giving them that praise that they probably deserve as well. So it is a good technique to use, but don't just try and find areas to provide positive feedback. If it needs to just be constructive feedback and ending on a positive plan to move forward, then that's perfectly fine as well. Now, overall, and looking at all of the different models, and considering key points to consider when providing feedback, there's some sections that I think are important to be aware of. First, timely. Make sure that you're providing feedback as quickly and as efficiently as you can, even if you do need to gather some data or evidence to back up your thoughts or opinions, um, to evidence what you're bringing them in for the feedback session for. Um, Try and get that feedback done as quickly as you possibly can. Caring, providing, empathy and assisting, that person to reach their full potential is really important. Creating a ground for positive change and reinforcing that positive behavior by leading from example is really important. But, again, a really good interpersonal skill is, emotional intelligence and being aware of what's going on. So, trying your best um to work with your team to develop relationships, to understand them, um, to be able to deliver that feedback in the most efficient and effective way to develop them. Checking for and understanding as well, you know, making sure that they fully understand the actions that you planned for them to improve in the future. Before closing that feedback discussion, maybe say to them, okay, so what have we gone through today? And what are you going to take from this? Ask them to reflect on that session, and then you can clarify their understanding then. And then making sure that you're following up from a feedback session with um, action and a monitoring session, or some way of reviewing that, they're actually moving forwards. Um, and progressing. So they're the key points I believe that you should consider, but also making sure feedback is consistent across, the board. Obviously, if people are not performing well, or they are performing well, If they are or they aren't performing well, if they're not performing well, they might need more feedback. If they are performing well, they should still be provided with feedback, but more of a positive feedback system. So don't leave people out just because that they're doing well. You know, successful people reach their goals not simply because of what they or who they are, but what they do. And, that goes for managers and leaders as well. So giving people a tap on the back when they're doing well um, is just as important as giving feedback to people that aren't performing. And, you know, it's important to consider, when you're using tools like KPIs, management by objectives, um, appraisals, reviews, supervisions, one-to-ones, it's important to ask yourself, what goal um, will this feedback help my organization to achieve? Or what issue will it help me to resolve? Don't waste time on providing feedback that you don't think is necessary or you don't think is going to help your team or that individual or the organization to move forward. So that concludes my session today on feedback as a development tool. If you have any questions regarding this session, please use these details to contact me. If you would like any more information relating to performance management, please watch the previous videos or the videos to come. Thank you for watching. Bye.